2 John now. Probably maybe only be this week and next week to get through this, because I tried to cut out a lot of the repeat from 1 John, but we'll see how it goes. And 2 John then is designated as the second epistle of John. It's an inspired letter written by one named John the Apostle. And the theme of 2 John concerns the importance of love and truth in the lives of Christians. And in first, let me see here, 1 John, I wanted to go back there because I wanted to ask you a question. 1 John chapter 2 and verses 7 and 8, John says there, "Brethren, I write no new commandment to you, but an old commandment which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word which you heard from the beginning. And again," John says, "again a new commandment I write to you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining." John speaks here of a new commandment, and he's speaking of love, loving one another. Why do you think John is saying that it's a new commandment? Is this something new that God's asked his people to do? Gord says no. Gord?
Well, Jesus had instructed the apostles to be servants.
Right.
And that's a show of love when you're, washing somebody's feet or whatever.
Okay.
Right. So to me, it's nothing new. Maybe John's just giving it as a reminder to them.
Okay. Yeah. Because if you remember way back in Leviticus 19, chapter 19, verse 18, Israel was commanded to love their neighbors, to do no harm. But here now, John is saying a new commandment. Well, Romans 13 and 10 reads, "Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law." Again, the idea of love. And as I thought about why is John saying this is new commandment, and my thought is that the Jewish people were known by their ordinances, right? Their sacrifices. They were known through their dress, through what they wore, how they wore their hair. And here now, John is saying to the Christians that the way you are going to be known is not through dress. Not, I was thinking the other day, Tammy and I were watching a road trip through Nepal, and Buddhists all dressed in a manner that as soon as we seen them on the TV, we knew right away who they were. And then the trip went down into India, and the Hindus, they dressed too. So they were known by the way they dressed. But John here is, I believe, saying to the Christians, how you are going to be known now is not through the way you dress, not through what you own, not through your business. It's through your love for one another. That's how you're going to be known as a Christian. Because I was thinking, the world doesn't understand love in the way that we do. And there was a point in our lives that we didn't know the true meaning of love. In our families, of course, we love one another, but as far as our neighbors, as the world goes, we didn't know the true meaning of love until we understood Christ and his purpose, and him dying for our sins. And then as we come together as brethren, we understand that each one of us was all in the same state at one time. We were all sinners. And now our sins have been forgiven because of our obedience to Christ. And that now we have a different outlook on what the meaning of love is. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, I think that's what John is trying to say to them when he says a new commandment. Is now you're known in a different way, and it will be known by, you'll be known by the love that you show one another. So that is one of the themes, and we also think, when we think of love and truth, we might jump to the idea of love the truth. Well, that's true, but the love first, we understand here with John, is that there's two types. There's a love for our brethren, and there's a love for the truth. And John wants them to understand that and guard against that. And he also in the book emphasizes the practical aspects of applying the proper attitude to reveal truth. And
Ruth has a comment.
The which
Ruth has a comment.
Okay. Yeah. So we move on then to the origin of our book, and if you look at, I wanted to read verses in 2 John. We'll go back to 2 John, and we'll start off. Dave kind of switched the questions around on us here, and so I'm switched it and started with question 1. But verse 1 in 2 John reads, and I'm reading from the New King James today. The elder to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in truth, and not only I, but also all those who have known the truth. And down to verse 4, I rejoice greatly that I have found some of your children walking in truth as we receive commandment from the Father. And verse 5, and now I plead with you, lady, not as though I wrote a new commandment to you, but that which we have had from the beginning, that we love one another. And down to verse 13, the children of your elect sister greet you. So those 4 verses I read to you to help us with our first question. And Dave's first question is, what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of the following views concerning the elect lady to whom the epistle is written? In other words, Dave wants us to discern, to figure out as best we can then, is this written to an individual, or is this written to a church? And the first one is the literal view, and the literal view holds that it is addressed to a real woman with children who was loved by all, because possibly she might have shown hospitality to preachers. Perhaps her home was used for church services, and also that she was related to other saints living in the area. But he asks us now, if you looked into this, what are the weaknesses with that thought? With it being written to an individual. Think about, I'll give you a hint, think about names. In all those verses that I read.
No, there is no individual's name
Right, good. Right. In all those verses, there's no proper name.
Just lady.
Right, elect lady. Okay. I looked that up in the Greek, but as I'm not versed well in Greek and anyone here, but there is a lot of controversy over whether this was an individual or a church, but I'll end my thoughts with that at the end. But the word elect, okay, is not elect a term for all Christians? Right? Jeff's shaking his head. Yeah, Colossians 3:12 tells us we are the elect. Okay, but as Gord just pointed out, John doesn't use any proper names, which is uncommon for John. John usually, if you look over when we get into 3 John, John emphasizes Gaius there a few times. So it's not really with John's style of writing that he doesn't name people. Colin?
I have 4 different versions. One is the Amplified, and it says the chosen elect lady is Syria, Cyria, and her children. I don't know where that comes from, but this is the Amplified version.
Oh, okay. And what was it? What did you? Yes. What was your reason?
What was the reading?
Yeah.
It says the elderly elder of the church addresses this letter to the elect, which is chosen lady Syria and her children.
Okay.
Cyria.
Right. That is, I think, one of the Greek terms for that. The chosen lady also. It's hard to discern, but going along with Gord's idea, remember the lady is mentioned, her children are mentioned, her sister is mentioned, none of them are named. Annette?
And the church is always given a description of the bride, while Christ is the groom. Bride is always a female, right?
Right.
Yeah, so lady here, elect lady, would be elect the church. Church is always given the female kind of like the bride and the groom. The groom who is Christ, while the church is the bride.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's the point B, the metaphorical view. And this view is what Annette just spoke of. It holds that it's being written to an unnamed local church, which is personified as the elect lady, while the church where the writer is located, where John is writing from, is personified as the elect sister. That's in verse 13. And even as with what Annette was pointing out, that is not uncommon in the New Testament, is it? Personifying the church in the feminine form we understand that. 2 Corinthians 11:2, Ephesians 5:25-29, 1 Peter 5:13, all speaks of the church in that manner. So the weakness with this thought, with the personifying of the church, is who might be the children of the elect lady. Are they members of the church? If so, then a problem arises as to why it seems to be written to an individual. My thoughts in studying everything is some of the people at this time, the people at that time in the first century, they knew who it was being written to. Okay? We're 2,000 years in the future. And there are verses in the Bible that are hard for us to discern exactly, who the writers are speaking to. But I kind of think it's hard to tell because I read all the different thoughts on this. And there's one side that says it's a person, and then another side says it's a church. But to me, one thing that we do know is that no matter whom it's written to, okay, the biblical principles that John is setting forth here must be taught as truth, okay, and applied in our lives where need be. Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, I think the first thing, the most important thing that you said, that they would know
Right.
who's being referred to. So that's the most important thing. For us to know may not be as important.
Right.
What might be important, though, is we realize we question this because is it an individual person and their children, or is it the church? Because we know in the scriptures there are some things that the church can do that I as an individual cannot do. And there are things that I must do as an individual that the church does not do.
Right.
The church and the individual are not the same.
Okay.
In my daily life, I'm not the church. I'm a member of the church. We are the church together.
Okay.
If there was instruction in this letter concerning that, depending on whether this is referring to the church or to an individual, well, then we'd have a cause for concern. Oh, does this apply to the church or to the individual? But it doesn't. There's nothing in this letter that would cause any conflict of is this written to the church or is it written to an individual?
Oh, okay, I
There
see.
is some individual instruction in verses 8, 9, and 10. 8, 9, 10, 11, but that's clearly to the individual. That is for the
Right.
individual. So there's nothing within the letter that's going to cause us a conflict, whether it really matters if it is the church. Or the
Right.
individual.
Oh, okay. No, that's true. And that's why I say, yeah, the biblical principles in this letter apply to us as individuals and as a church. And verse 1 says, but also all those who have known the truth, that's us. So, but like I say, some of the harder verses, there are those that will get very dogmatic over their thoughts, their views. So my thought is just, let's take the principles out of what John's speaking of, and he began it with love, love for one another and love for the truth, which is, something that as Christians, that's how we're different than the world, and the world sees that. Okay, they understand that. It's the world has a selfish love at times, and sometimes those in the world can show proper love, maybe even embarrass us sometimes into how we should be treating one another. But as Christians, we never show a selfish love. That should never really be a part of our attitude. So I'll move on then. No other thoughts on that. Dave put this slide in. I tried to figure out why he threw this one in there, but what it made me think of was Galatians 4 and verse 4 says that, but when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. And when I looked at Dave's map here, because the lighter shade on the map of the brown, or whatever color that is, the lighter shade is the Roman Empire at this time. And I had another slide, but Of course, it's at home on my desk. But near the end of the first century, Rome also controlled Britain. So Rome had quite a fistlock, if you will, on the time. And a little history and geography helps us to understand and see God's wisdom here with this map. Because remember, when Rome completed the conquest of the Italian peninsula, the boot there, in the 3rd century before Christ, she fell under the spell, if you will, of the Greek culture of southern Italy. The Romans started copying the Greek culture, and they adopted it as their own, okay? And she slowly moved through the Mediterranean world. She was making a political contribution needed to prepare the world for the coming of Christ. And the reason I say that was because Rome used the common written language at the time, which was the Greek, and she allowed the easy flow of people through the entire region. There was no boundaries. In our day and age, I just can't jump in a car and cross the border and go into the States. I need to check with them if that's allowed yet. But Rome had no boundaries, so you could travel anywhere in that vicinity. And so then think of the apostles. I thought the apostles moved freely from province to province at that time. And the Greeks also were city builders and dwellers. They didn't like the farms and the countryside, but the Romans saw an advantage to that, and they followed suit, and they started urbanizing the Mediterranean world. And when you think of the Apostle Paul, he used that to his advantage, didn't he? Spending time in many of its cities, all the apostles. Remember, Paul spent, 2 years in Corinth? And there was a freedom of traveling around. And Rome also, I thought about it, facilitated the spread of the gospel by building her own versions of interstate highways. People weren't tramping through the bush. In the countryside, they were on highways. They weren't asphalted highways like we have, but there was history says over 250,000 miles of stone highway. People could travel along, horses and carts, and that helped God's children, I think, go into all the world. And when I think of of Galatians 4:4, with Christ coming at this time, there wasn't any hindrance, was there? There wasn't any hindrance to him traveling around. There wasn't any hindrance in the 1st century, of course, till the persecutions came, but that still has no bearing on the fact that the apostles and the Christians could move anywhere they wanted. And I thought it was kind of interesting myself. If you're not a history or geography buff, it might not be, but I see God's wisdom in that as compared to now in our society. As Christians, we just can't travel freely wherever we want. You know what I mean? So anyways, we'll move on then to the author. And the author of the letter simply refers to himself as the elder. And this is another controversy over who has written the book. But Dave asks us a question, and he says, how do the following passages provide evidence indicating that the same author who wrote 1 John is also responsible for having written 2 John? And remember the term elder, okay? both Peter and John, the Apostle Peter and John, on occasion called themselves an elder instead of an apostle. Okay, and maybe I wondered about why they would use at one area in their letters, they would call themselves an elder to whomever they were writing, and to another group they would call themselves an apostle. And I just wondered that they might have been at some point trying to convey an attitude of love instead of passing on the attitude of authority as an apostle. That doesn't surprise me with our children. Sometimes you want your child to do something, you reach out and love first. Well, then if the child doesn't do what you ask them, well, then you lay down the law. I have the authority. So that's my own thought. But the fact of the matter is, at some points in the New Testament, Peter himself used the term elder, and he used the term apostle. But Dave asks us then, if we look at 2 John, verses 4 to 6. I'll get Gord. Do you want to read that, please?
I rejoiced greatly that I have found some of your children walking in truth, as we received commandment from the Father. And I now plead with you, ladies, not as though I write a new commandment to you, but that which we have heard from the beginning, that we love one another. This is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, that as you have heard from the beginning, you should walk in it.
Okay. And then Dave wants us to turn back to 1 John. I put the passages on the slide, I forgot. 1 John 7 to 11. Do you want to read all that, Kyla?
Sure.
Okay.
Brethren, I write no new commandment to you, but an old commandment which you have had from the beginning. The old commandment is the word of which you heard from the beginning. Again, a new commandment I write to you, which thing is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away, and the true light is already shining. He who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in darkness until now. He who loves his brother abides in the light, and there is no cause for stumbling in him. But he who hates his brother is in darkness, and walks in darkness, and does not know where he is going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes.
Okay. Thank you, Kyla. Do you see a similarity in those verses? Yeah.
Usually, like if, let's say, the police are investigating something, they find something written, they can compare it to other writings to see the same pattern, same tonations, the same wording.
Right.
So this is almost a duplicate of what John said in 2 John.
That's right. Almost word for word, isn't it? There's no contradiction in any of those verses. If it's like if we're asked, if I'm asked to define love and Gord's asked to define love, they're going to be different comments. If it's written word, it'll be written differently, different thoughts, because we think differently. We word, maybe not think differently, but we phrase it differently. So here, in these verses, to me, it's beyond doubt. It is the same writer. And then 2 John 7 to 11, Dave give us some big readings, but Jeff, I'll get you to read that one then, please. 2 John 7. Oh.
For many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. Look to yourselves that we do not lose those things we worked for, but that we may receive a full reward. Whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house, nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of threw you there. I took the chapter out on all the slides because 2 John's only one chapter, but obviously I missed this one. Okay, that's our 2 John reading, and then 1 John chapter 4 verses 1 to 3. Tammy, do you want to read that, please?
Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming, and is now already in the world.
Okay, thank you. Do you see any contradictions in those two passages? No? Jeff shaking his head. No, it's similar, isn't it? Similar phrases in warning about false teachers, and that's something that writers, speakers, each one of us, we're describing false teachers. For sure, we're going to emphasize that in a different manner, and even the guidelines that are spoken of dealing with these false teachers are almost exactly the same. And he points out also that they're deceivers and they're false teachers. So, really, it's kind of without a doubt that it's the same writer. Everything is the same, his whole style. And to sometimes with different commentators arguing over, silly things. John was inspired. He was an apostle of Christ. And when you can take two books and compare the verses, the writings, the warnings, and everything is almost word for word, then it's without a doubt, the Apostle John. Jeff?
If anything, 2 John adds a little extra information, which wasn't specifically in chapter 4 of 1 John. We see in 2 John that depending on how we treat false teachers, we need to be careful we don't share
Right.
in their action, even though we're not doing that. But if we're good, because it says, do not receive them in your house nor greet them. Does that literally mean we don't say hello to someone who's a false teacher? That's not what it's referring to.
No.
It's whether we greet them as if they were a faithful fellow Christian and treat them like a fellow Christian. If we treat them like a faithful fellow Christian, we're actually partaking in their false teaching.
Right.
We're basically condoning their actions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Be careful we don't condone false teaching.
Yeah. And more importantly, it goes along with your idea, is pointing that out to them. We can't be buddies. Somehow we need to let them know. This is what I believe, and I believe it because it's truth. It's in the Bible. Kyle?
So the same principle applies to Christians who is this fellowship. For the reason of maybe they're teaching false teachings or whatever, we cannot treat them as an enemy. We have to consider too that this person is lost and we have to teach them.
Right.
So, okay, fine. It says don't even greet them or welcome them in their house, but doesn't mean that you write them off. Too. Maybe you could meet. I don't know if you're not supposed to really invite them in the house, as it says, but if you want to teach them, if you have to go somewhere else, I don't know. I'm just saying we cannot treat people as an enemy. We
Right.
have to acknowledge them. True.
Exactly. Yeah, our attitudes, sometimes, we think of examining ourselves around the table. I think, when we're dealing with others, we need to think a moment on our attitude, how we're approaching this person. And of course, no, we can't allow them to think we agree with them, and that it doesn't really matter to God. But, there's ways that we can approach that person in attitude. So, when you think about it too, we really don't want to scare them off, because there's lots of honest religious people, good-hearted, that love their neighbors too and do things for them. Now their worship and where they worship may be wrong, but we don't want to scare them off and turn them off. Say, well, wow, the way Bill approached me, I don't want nothing to do with him. Church he goes to, but we want to kind of draw them in and have an opportunity to teach them, have an opportunity to just say, this is why I believe, Jeff?
Maybe to put it in a real world application to understand it better, if Jehovah's Witnesses, for example,
Right.
taking on them only,
Right.
Someone who's teaching false doctrine, and we understand it's false, they come to the door. Do I take this literally and not invite them in my house? No, it's not a literal. I would invite them in order to sit down and let's talk about what the scriptures say.
Right.
But this is to be taken literally in the sense that I'm not to share in their evil deed by inviting them in my house and saying, I really appreciate the work that your church is doing to share the gospel. You go on out, you say, that's really good work you're doing. We are also doing the good work in sharing the gospel. I'll pray for your work and you pray for my work. Yep. Oh my, where's that just going?
Right.
There's a whole difference between bringing someone in to encourage and condone their actions, or to bring them into your house and sit down with them. Let's go through the scriptures, see what God says. Let's find out what the truth is, and let's both obey.
Right.
What the gospel says. And then if they choose not to,
exactly. Yeah.
that's all we can do.
That's yeah. And if you slam your door in their face, you're never going to. You've lost that soul. Because that is our duty, really, to try and win as many souls as we can to change them. But that's right. At some point we have to let them know, as Jeff said, our beliefs and where they're going wrong. Let's first, well, maybe. Oh no. Okay. Question 3. I was going to try and get us through the date section, but maybe we'll leave that. Or actually, no, let's get through the date section, because there's controversy here on when the book was written, but I'll just take us back to the last slide here. Where's my section on date here? If we remember now, John, the Emperor Trajan, history, okay? The early part of his reign began in 98 AD. And John must have written prior to that time. And First John, it would appear that First John and Second John were written pretty close to the same time, shortly around the same time. And they're saying history is saying that because in AD 81 to 96 was the reign of the Emperor Domitian, and there's no mention of that in John's letters, of that persecution. So based on that fact, Dave especially is holding with the thought of 85 to 95 is most likely the time that he wrote the book. But as we've said through all our date sections, everyone has a different point of time that it was written, and it doesn't take anything away from the scripture, whether we're right or we're wrong.
I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to defend